Need a little luxury in your life? That's why I recently treated myself to a staycation at the Inn at 500 Capital. Whether you're looking for a romantic getaway, a special celebration, or just a break from routine, you're going to love their Four Diamond Boutique experience with gorgeous rooms, penthouses, and suites right in the heart of downtown Boise. You'll be greeted with a complimentary drink on arrival, have access to free shuttle service, and even your pet is welcome. And here's an insider tip: book more than one night and save with their weekend escape rate. Book your stay now at inat500.com. Today on CityCast Boise. Christian nationalism keeps making headlines, but it's not the only way faith shows up in local politics. In Idaho, progressive clergy are using their voices to fight for LGBTQ rights and reproductive freedom. But are they being heard? We're exploring how they keep the faith against daunting odds. It's Thursday, February 20th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Joining me today is Reverend Sarah Lawal, minister at Boise Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Thanks so much for being here today, Sarah.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
You regularly testify at the Idaho legislature on issues like reproductive rights, LGBTQ equality and equity. So I'm really curious, what drives you to engage in that space as a pastor, as a reverend, as a minister?
So I come from this faith tradition that has a long history and is deeply rooted in justice movements. And in all of those movements that you just named, in particular, in the 20th and 21st century. And so social justice has always been a part of my ministry and a part I've been really attracted to in ministry. So I really wanted to serve a community where that could be part of my work and role. And Boise, being a capital city in a very red state, offered a great opportunity for myself and my congregation to represent Unitarian Universalism, but also just liberal religion writ large, and give voice to the values and the faith and the practices of liberal religion in a time and in a state where the conservative right has the loudest microphone.
And something we're wrestling with as a nation and as a state, as a capital city of Idaho, in large part due to the rise of Christian nationalism and other dominionist religious rhetoric, is the idea of how much religion should be brought into the political sphere. So how do you define the appropriate role of religion in politics? And is there a way to engage without imposing beliefs on others?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I hear that question a lot in spaces I'm in. I hear it from my own congregants. And so I really understand the deep concern about the mixing of religion and politics. But I will say that the framers of the Constitution came out of religious persecution and were very much invested in this question. And so when we talk about separation of church and state, we talk about the freedom to practice and for government not to impinge upon religion. But then when we understand that religion is about values and about how we show up in the world, when we say we practice our faith, we live our faith in the world, that is inherently political. And of course, then now we're watching Christianity, conservative, right, Christian nationalist Christianity, I want to be really clear when we talk about that, taking root in our government and fueling policies that are targeting all kinds of different communities and vulnerable communities and marginalized populations. And so even more so now, I think religion has got to be a voice in the political sphere. And I do think it's possible to do it without inflicting harm. And I think that's why folks like me show up, because we really want to honor the traditional understanding of separation in church and state. And so we show up in political spaces and in the legislature in order to represent that understanding that there are a diverse religious communities who believe very differently and understand things very differently and who are being harmed by these laws that are being put forward with the underpinnings of conservative Christianity.
So just to flip what you said just a little bit, I'm really curious what you would say if, let's say, a Christian nationalist, I've talked with them before. Sometimes it's talking, sometimes it's yelling. But something that they will say is, well, we're just trying to influence politics with our values. We're just trying to instill that into the public space for things that we think are harmful or problematic. And so is this two sides of a similar coin, or how do you separate that in your mind?
I understand that. And I appreciate that. I mean, I think we should be using our values and we can't help but do that. However, what conservative Christian nationalism is doing is restricting rights, is taking rights away. And when I look at the hoped for ideals of our democracy and constitution, it is about freedom, period, full stop. So when your policies are taking rights away from a group of people, that is not freedom. Now, you can practice that in your own home. You can think those things and practice that in your own churches. That's freedom. But to put that upon society writ large is not freedom. To suggest that trans folks and trans kids don't deserve the same rights as cisgender kids and other families, or that queer folks should not allowed to be married like their straight counterparts, that's unequal rights. And so for me, it really is a matter of how do we understand human rights and freedom, and how do we ensure that they are equal in our government? But that's not what's happening. So what's happening is we're getting all of that religion and all of those religious values being put upon people and restricting their rights and freedoms.
And Sarah, we've had lots of guests on the show who have indicated or outright said that they don't feel like our legislators listen to people when they testify. They don't listen to the people who are targeted by the bills or proposals or laws. Do you feel like your voice as a religious leader is heard?
No, not by them. I've changed my understanding of why I go and advocate at the legislature. I've sat in far too many committee hearings where dozens, if not hundreds of people have shown up to testify, particularly folks from marginalized communities, when a lot of the anti-trans and anti-queer legislation was going through the legislature last year before. Doesn't matter. However, I still feel a deep commitment to representing the liberal religious traditions and a different understanding of religious values and faith. And that is why I go, because I want them to hear those words. I want them to know and to see and to have to look me in the eye that there are other religious leaders who believe differently. And then I also do it because I want the community that's impacted to also hear the voice of faith communities that are on their side. So I no longer think my voice is going to make a difference in the legislation, but I hope that it will make a difference in the conversation.
Are you seeing more faith communities stepping up for social justice issues in the state, or is that kind of an uphill battle?
I think I have seen a slow increase over the years that I've been here in Boise. I've been here 9 years, and I know there's a long history of particular faith leaders in this community, particularly when you look back at the history of the Add the Words movement, who were deeply, deeply involved in that movement. Particularly Rabbi Dan Fink has been a real leader in justice. But I've seen more and more other colleagues from mainline Protestant traditions show up when they can in spaces. And I think particularly now with this new administration, more and more faith leaders are starting to raise their voice and to have a voice in the conversation, because it is so troubling.
And have you noticed people becoming more disillusioned with faith or faith traditions because of its entanglement with right-wing politics?
Without a doubt. I am very aware, particularly people, this is my experience with folks that I know who have come out of high control conservative traditions, folks like you,
Yep.
folks who have been harmed by religious traditions, particularly queer folks, right? So they've been harmed because of their queer identity or been shunned or ostracized, really are like, that's it, I'm out. No religion. And so I even hear a lot of people say, well, if I ever did go to church, Sarah, I might come to your church.
I think we've had that conversation a few times.
And I appreciate that. And it's so kind. And just to be clear, like no expectations. I really appreciate all the community relationships and friendships I have out there. And you don't all need to be coming to my church or any church. But I think that aversion to the problems that conservative religion has caused keeps people away in larger and larger numbers. And we're seeing that in some of the larger Pew studies around those who are identifying as not religious.
Well, and definitely growing up, a conversation I hear a lot is, what radicalized you? What radicalized you? And it was being taught, well, Jesus said, be kind. And like I grew up LDS and there was a song about if somebody's different, you should be their friend. You should take care of them. You should, not ostracize them. And then I guess we were supposed to grow out of that, it felt like. And if you didn't, now that's radical. That's radical to want to be friends with someone or support someone who sees the world very differently than you do, or just lives a life that is different than you do. And so that's definitely something that then translates to, it's tricky for me with religion, probably because of how widespread and powerful it feels like Christian nationalism is, where it feels like that same control, that same ostracization of these certain groups that should not be ostracized. That I'm like, wait, I thought growing up I was taught we should love them and they're our brothers and sisters.
Yes.
What sort of promises have you made to yourself this year? Maybe get in better shape or eat healthier, save more money, travel somewhere new. What about discovering a new culture by learning a new language? With Babbel, you can do that in just a few weeks. I'm CityCast CEO David Plotz, and I'm having such a good time learning Spanish on Babbel this year. I'm taking a trip to Mexico City in the spring, and Babbel is giving me the Spanish foundation that's going to make my trip so much better. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons, handcrafted by more than 200 language experts, get you to begin speaking your new language in 3 weeks, or at whatever pace you choose. And because conversing is the key to really understanding each other in a new language, Babbel is designed using practical, real-world conversations. And one way they do that is with their own podcasts. I'm a podcast listener. I'm guessing since you're listening to this podcast, you are too. And I have been getting ready for my Mexico City trip by listening to Babbel's conversational podcasts. There's a short conversation you listen to, then an instructor talks you through what happened. And then you listen again, and then you catch everything when you listen that second time. There's also a great read-along transcript, too, which I love. The one I did today was with Maria and Carmela trying to make dinner plans, but Carmela is so busy. She's way too busy with work and yoga, but finally they agreed on brunch on Saturday. Studies from Yale, Michigan State, and other universities continue to prove that Babbel works. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. So let's get more of you talking in a new language. Babbel is gifting CityCast listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
This episode is brought to you by MeUndies. Underwear drawers are like the Wild West. You never know what you're going to pull out or what shape it's in. So upgrade your collection with the buttery soft comfort of MeUndies. MeUndies' signature fabric is as soft as a warm hug from your favorite sweater. Plus, it's breathable and oh so comfy, making it ideal for all-day wear. Get 20% off your first order, plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/Spotify with code SPOTIFY. That's MeUndies.com/Spotify, code SPOTIFY.
Sarah, Unitarian Universalists have been involved in major social and political movements from abolition up through the civil rights era, up till today. So how does that history and legacy inform your work today?
It's one of the things that I loved most about this faith was learning how much of it was tied up and lived out in social movements at a time when a lot of liberal religion was really getting involved in social movements and invested in what we now call the social gospel. So looking at the gospels of the Christian Bible and trying to follow those teachings and enact them in the world, right? What does it really mean to love our neighbor? Well, there's inequality here. We should address it. So those are all of the things that we work to live out in the world.
And what lessons can today's faith leaders take from past religious activism?
Well, I can't help but bring myself back to some of those very movements. I think of the civil rights movement, which were in their time fueled by and led by religious leaders. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a minister and preacher himself, he used his religious ties to help further the movement. He would make all of these relationships with ministers and denominations across the country, use them to come out for those civil disobedience protests. I mean, it says a lot when we watch clergy people being arrested on television, when we start to hear faith traditions talk about the ills of unequal rights. That sways people. I think it really sways people because I think deep down we all, I do believe this of our Christian nationalists, we want to be good people. And sometimes what I see is that our erroneous understanding of religion gets in our way.
And I'm really curious your perspective on this. Why do you think, or in your perspective, why is it that Christian nationalism has taken such a foothold in our government and is really the religious voices that it seems like our legislators are listening to more as opposed to progressive faith voices? What happened there?
I ask that question a lot and have been doing a lot of reading to try to get at that question. And I'm not sure I still fully understand it because it's just really hard to watch this, what feels like a de-evolution of society. And I will say in all the reading that I've done, it seems to be that it is the underpinnings are racism, that Christianity in the way that it unfolded has rooted itself, completely intertwined itself with white supremacy culture, patriarchy, right? White people still hold most of the power in this country and have from its inception. And even though we have been working to dismantle and tease out those threads and try to work on greater inclusion, which I hate that that's become a dirty political word, the backlash is if that is somehow going to take away my power, then now we have to do everything we can to protect that power. It comes down to those early days when Christianity really separated itself along racial lines.
I want to ask, as a more progressive faith leader, what do you make of the significant conservative backlash last month against the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, D.C., Bishop Marianne Budde, after she called for love and empathy at President Trump's inaugural prayer service?
Isn't that fascinating? I mean, I think it's just really indicative of the cultural moment that we are in, where we have a president who is known for his horrible rhetoric and hate and freely expresses it, and so has emboldened people to follow him and to be awful to each other. And in fact, Bishop Budde's sermon was a plea against that exact thing, which was like, if we can just take a moment and try to see each other as human beings and try not to be so reactive and so performative in our resistance and hate and all that, we might actually be able to achieve some greater unity, even with our differences of values and policies. There still could probably be some humanity and human unity. And it's terrible that she got all that kind of hate, except it makes me laugh because if you watch it, it's a beautiful sermon. She delivered it fabulously. She used perfect scripture to underline her points. And I'm glad she's getting attention. If anything, I'm glad the backlash is bringing more attention to her, to the church, and to the values that she professed on behalf of all of us.
Do you think there are more opportunities for that bold proclamation of faith in our political spheres, maybe particularly in Idaho?
Oh, yes, I do. We're so consumed by the onslaught of Christian nationalism. Even when our media tries to report a sort of balanced faith view, I think it gets forgotten. It somehow doesn't take hold in the same way. And I wish there were a way that we could figure out how to bring, more sermons, more clergy people like Bishop Buddy out into the fray, and into the public sphere in a bigger, bolder way.
Now, this is a personal question, but I think it doesn't just apply to me. As somebody who came from a high demand faith tradition, and this area, there are lots of ex-Mormons. We tend to thrive in this area, but there are other people who have left other religions, 2x2s, Jehovah's Witnesses. So how can these Boiseans who are maybe triggered a little bit by the idea of religion and what all the things that religion can entail, how can we engage with faith leaders working for social justice without feeling like we're endorsing religion itself?
I think it's about relationships. I think it's good for people to see, and I think it's good for our leaders to see that you can be a good person and you don't have to be religious. But we can inhabit space together, and we can come together, and we can do good work together alongside each other. And I've watched recently, just in some legislative hearings, some of our more conservative legislators, they were asking questions as if they cannot quite understand how can anyone be a good person or have a moral compass without the Christian faith. And that's a bizarre question to me.
Yeah.
Well, of course you can. Good people are out there in the world. Religion doesn't make us good. We know this because we have seen all of the evil that religion has done in this world. Religion doesn't make people good. Christianity certainly doesn't make people good. It's caused a lot of destruction in the world. But it can be a positive experience for people. It can be an anchor. It can be nourishing in so many ways. And in this world and some of our faith traditions today, we're acknowledging the harm that faith has caused, and we're trying to undo it and do better and be better. And in the name of our faith tradition, to try to kind of break that understanding a little bit.
Sarah, what gives you hope when it comes to the future of faith in Idaho public life?
I think I can only speak to this moment because I know we are in a moment where hope is really hard to find for people. The onslaught of the policies and orders from this administration, the continued targeting and emboldening of our own state legislature is painful and wearisome. And so we are turning to each other for support, for care, for love, for shelter, for sanctuary, for whatever it is we need. I think community is now looking and saying, we can't rely on our leaders anymore, but we can create some sense of support, protection, and safety among us. And I think there's a role that faith can play there. We can also be those spaces that open our doors and say, we're right there with you. Come inside. And you don't have to be members of our traditions to receive that care and that love and that protection and that safety from our communities. And I just hope that communities like mine and faith leaders like me will continue to show up and walk alongside them and say, what do you need? How can we help?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and share your perspective and your insight into what's happening with religion in Boise. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review because it helps other people find us. We'll be back tomorrow morning with our Friday News Roundup. Catch you then.